Great. I'm really happy that you can hear me. And I'm really excited to see so many of you here. It's like really a little bit overwhelming. Okay. Yeah, it seems like everyone can hear me. People say that everything works. Fine. I believe we can start. If anyone else comes in, they'll just join us and they will have to catch up. So first things first, welcome to our second webinar. My name is Irina Vladimirovna Lipchanskaya. I am an associate professor of Institute of International Education of Moscow State Pedagogical University. I work with students on a unique double diploma program that we carry out together in association with London University. And specifically, I help my students prepare for an international English language testing exams. Does it work? Can people hear me actually? Yeah, it works. Okay. Well, I'm gonna ignore the comments for a bit. So I help students prep for international exams, and I've been helping students prepare for different sorts of tests and exams for quite a while, for more than 10 years, I guess. So today, what I have on offer for you. Today we're going to talk about one of the most difficult parts of Russian state exam, being namely writing. And I want to talk about writing task 1. So we are going to talk about writing a letter. I am going to share my screen with you. I'm going to, I have a little presentation for you guys. So the topic is conventions of letter writing in English. So what do we mean by conventions? Whoops. Conventions are certain rules, guidelines, things that you are supposed to follow, which concern the register, the layout of your letter, and vocabulary and grammar structures that you are using in your letter. So basically what we are going to do, we are going to walk together through the entire process of writing a letter, and we are going to answer 2 very important questions. We are going to talk about what and how. To be a little bit more specific, we are going to look at the content, what you actually have to write in your letter. We are going to see some phrases and fixed expressions you might want to use in your letter writing. And particularly, we're going to talk about some formulas, some politeness and courtesy formulas that you have to include in your letter in order to succeed. Also, we are going to answer the question, how to do it. And here, how refers to register, in what style and in what manner your letter has to be written. We are going to talk a little bit about timing, how to organize everything so that you have enough time and you don't hurry, but you also don't waste your time. We are going to talk about how to structure your letter, and also how to organize it on a page, like what it should look like on a piece of paper. So to start with, let's have a look at a sample task. This is a typical writing task 1, something that you expect to see on an exam day. It offers you a letter from your friend, English-speaking friend. Here it's Susan. Well, this particular task talks about Susan's visit to the zoo, and she asks you questions about the zoo. She asks for your opinion, and she also shares some news with you in the last paragraph. Then the task reads, what do you have to do in your reply? You obviously have to answer the questions Sue asked you, and you also have to ask 3 questions of your own regarding the news she shared. I always encourage my students when they work on preparing for their writing tests to read the task very, very carefully, because 100% of the time, the task has everything that you need to know, and it tells you everything that you have to do. Here, you also see that you have to write about between 100 and 140 words. And most importantly, it tells you that you have to remember the rules of letter writing. These are exactly the things that we are going to talk about today. So let's move on. We are going to start, well, a bit surprisingly, we're going to start with question how to succeed in completing writing task 1. You have the sample task on the screen as well, just for your information. And we're going to start talking about register. Register refers to generally the style you have to organize your letter in and the kind of language you're supposed to use when completing this task. As you know from the sample task, you are answering a letter to a friend, which means that you have to be quite informal. You are on friendly terms. You don't need to be official. You don't need to sound cold. You can actually just pretend that you're friends and be informal. However, what I have to comment on that and say, Susan from our task is your pen friend, the person you are writing to regularly, but probably you have never seen her, which means that your friendship, although maybe a long one, is kind of virtual. So I would suggest not to go too informal, not to go too deep in this relationship, and try and stay neutral. Kinda as if you are talking to someone you meet, well, 2 times a year. Well, okay, maybe once a month, but not the person you are really close to. What this means that you are using informal, neutral language. It means that you can use some contractions. You can write I'm instead of I am. You can write haven't instead of have not, etc., etc., etc. That is totally fine. It is actually expected of you to use contractions in your letter. However, when I say that your language, although it is informal, has to stay neutral, it means that you can't use any slang words. you cannot use any colloquial expressions, those words that are too spoken, too everyday, those words that you can possibly use with friends, but you would definitely not use with your aunt, for example. So, yes to contractions, total no to slang and colloquial words. To consider the matter of timing. For the first task, for the first writing task, you have about 20 minutes. That is suggested timing, and most students agree with me. It's enough to write about 140 words. What I insist when I help my students prepare, and what I insist that you guys do when you prepare for your unified state exam, please give yourself some time to prepare, to plan your answer. It may be a minute if you are very confident. You might want to leave about 3 minutes to plan things. Planning helps a lot. It helps you to organize your ideas. It helps you to think of some vocabulary and jot it down. It also helps you not to waste your time, actually. So out of those 20 minutes, I think you should spend 2 or 3 minutes before you start writing to plan your answer. Then you have the bulk of this time, about 15 minutes maybe, to actually write. Here is where your creativity goes wild and you write quickly but carefully. And we have about 2 minutes left out of the suggested 20 minutes. And I beg you, like the same way I beg my students, I ask you nicely to leave some time for yourself to check your own work. Checking, proofreading is an important step, especially when we talk about writing, because it helps you get rid of silly things. It helps you correct those misspellings that you might have when you are in a hurry or when you are really excited. It helps you check that, it helps you check that there is S in third person singular in every case that needs to be there. It helps you check that all your verbs and nouns actually agree. Also, it gives you some opportunity to see that you covered all the important points in your letter. It gives you some time to see that you answered all the questions and you actually asked 3 questions that they insist on in the sample task. I have a little tip for you. What I suggest to my students and what I suggest to you, create some sort of a template for your letter. What I mean by a template, you have some time to practice before the actual exam date. So my suggestion is that you create, a framework. You create a plan for your writing. You organize it the way we are going to look at in a couple of minutes. and you fill it in with some phrases, some expressions that you want to use during your exam. And you try and keep this template in your memory. I do not suggest that you have to learn it by heart, but it's a great idea to have it with you always in your head, so that it saves you time on actual exam date. So, kind of giving a short overview. Your language in the letter has to be informal, but rather neutral. You can use contractions, but you can't use any slang words. And I insist that you spend some time out of these 20 minutes to plan your answer and proofread it. So let's move on to the next question, how? And here we are going to take a look at the structure of your letter and also at its layout. So there are 8 key elements that you have to include in your letter. You see them on the screen now. Because it is a paper letter, not an email, not an article, you're writing with your hand, you have to include your address and date. I guess that should be the date of the exam, actually. This is important. You have to remember to include this point. Otherwise, you might lose some points for this answer. Next, what everyone starts with and what every polite person has to do, you have to greet your friend. You have to address Susan from our task and say something nice to her. That's the second step. Then you continue and you start your letter. And here I am going to suggest some phrases you can use to sound polite and friendly at the same time. This initial part of your letter, your address, greeting, and opening phrases, starting phrases, they are there to kind of lead you into the body. That is your introduction. The most important part is the body of your letter, obviously. Here you actually have to create the content and deal with questions and tasks from the writing task. Your body paragraph 1 deals with your friend's questions. And that is probably the longest part of your letter. You have to answer 3 questions, and this part will be the biggest one. Your second body paragraph, which is the next step, has to have your reaction to the news your friend shares with you. Here also, I will suggest a couple of phrases that you might want to use to convey this message, to say how you feel about the news. And then you go on to ask your friend some details about, well, in our sample task, it's about a dog. That is the bulk of your letter. The body is probably the most important part. However, it is the one that I might say easier to organize. Then we go to the end of our letter writing. And again, we have to be very careful with including necessary politeness formulas. So the sixth element here is a courtesy phrase, something you say to your friend to continue your conversation, some formula of politeness that you want to use to say that you want to talk more. Then you sign off, you say goodbye, and lastly, you sign your name. Don't forget about that as well. Another important thing that we have to look at is the way your letter is organized on a page. I would say that it might look similar to what you now see on your screen at the right-hand side of your screen. Your address, together with the date, are at the top right corner. The rest of your letter is, well, kind of centered in the middle of the page or closer to the left border, to the left side of the page. Another thing that you need to know, all these elements refer to separate parts of your letter. That means that greeting is one line, starting the letter is another line, or maybe even a paragraph. Two body paragraphs have to be separate paragraphs. And then a courtesy phrase and sign off are also separate lines on your paper. So 8 important elements. For like the central part refers to context, everything else, greeting and courtesy phrases, they are the formulas of politeness. Now let's go on, and we are getting into the most interesting part, I think. We are getting into what vocabulary you can use, what you can write in your letter, and obviously we're starting with greetings and some opening phrases. Your letter is an informal one, so you might use some words that you actually use every day when you talk to your friends. You can say hi, you can say hello, and then you have to include the name of your friend. In our example, that would be hi Susan or hello Susan. These two phrases are both informal, friendly, and neutral. You can also use dear Susan in our case. It might sound a bit old-fashioned, like no one talks like that today. Still, it is a polite way to address a friend or to talk to anyone actually. And it suggests that you are friendly to a person and, well, just polite. It's your choice. You use the greeting that you are comfortable with. The next line, something important to note here. Punctuation, the issue on punctuation. You have to include a comma after your friend's name. We do not put exclamation marks there. We do not leave this line hanging. You end the line with a comma after your friend's name. The way you address your friend doesn't matter. Hi, Susan, comma, or dear Susan, comma. Then you need another sentence to say something polite to your friend, to open your letter and acknowledge that you are in conversation, which is going on. So what you might say in the opening paragraph, you might want to say thank you to your friend for her letter, for Susan's letter, or for her reply, or just for writing to you, you might go and say that it's great to hear from her again, or it's great to hear from Susan so soon. And what I might suggest here, you can actually combine. You can do both. You can say thank you, and you can say that you are really happy to hear from Susan. This will give you 2 sentences. If you are a bit worried about the word count, you might want to make this opening paragraph a little bit longer and write 2 sentences here, combining some of these options. So, going on, in the body paragraph 1, where you have to answer your friend's questions, this is the longest, as I already said, and mostly the questions they ask you in these letters refer to something you usually do. They ask you about what you do or how you do that. They ask for your opinion on some issues, and they usually want you to explain your position. So here I have some useful language that you might include in your letter when answering those questions. When they ask you about what do you usually do, etc., etc., it's quite obvious that you can use some adverbs of frequency, like usually, or often, or always. Sometimes they ask you about other people as well and what they do. So you can come up with a sort of generalization. You can say that in general, people, I don't know, take pets, buy pets, for example. Or mostly people go to the zoo with their kids, something of the sorts. Then often they ask for your opinion. I hope you know quite a lot of ways to express your opinion in English. Here are some useful phrases you might want to start your sentence with. You can simply start with I think or I believe, or you can use a longer phrase, something like in my opinion or from my point of view. Mind the punctuation again. After those phrases, longer ones, the introductory phrases, you also need to put a comma. Often the task asks you to explain your position. And well, the simplest way to do this is to say, I do this or I think so because, and go on with explaining your idea. Or you can give your idea first and say, that is why you believe so. Or it means such and such. The trickiest part about paragraph 1, I think, is that those questions usually are of a similar type. Either you have 3 questions about what do you usually do, or you have 3 questions asking for your opinion. What I recommend to do when you deal with that part of your letter: paraphrase. Try to say that this is your opinion in different ways. Try to use couple of the phrases from this list, for example, to make your writing look more interesting, more varied, because it also gives you extra points for vocabulary. This is body paragraph 1. Then you have body paragraph 2. In the second body paragraph, you have to react to a piece of news your friend shared with you and ask for some details about this news. So I'm confident that you know how to ask questions in English. That's why I do not have anything on questions here. I present to you a list of phrases that are good for expressing your reaction. You can say that it's great to hear something, or you are really happy to hear that. You can thank your friend again for sharing this information. These like three first sentences, they are neutral, and you would want a full stop at the end of those sentences. Next two sentences show also your emotions. You can say something of what wonderful news, or that's great, or that's unfortunate, as I have in the example. And these two sentences end in exclamation marks. You remember that different sorts of sentences, I mean, like different emotional coloring of your sentences, also adds to your writing. It makes your writing more interesting and, well, more beautiful. But please be careful with exclamation marks. Don't use too many. Maybe if you don't feel comfortable with exclamation marks and emotional phrases and sentences, maybe don't use them at all. Make your letter neutral. But sometimes it's great that you can have some emotional sentences as well. Also, a little tip concerning body paragraph 2. When you give your reaction, you can choose one of these phrases from the list, and I would recommend to add a comment. If you remember our sample task about Susan, Susan has adopted a pet. So you might say something, that's great, I'm really happy for you. And you may comment that you also want to have a pet, or that you already have one, and then go on and start asking your questions. Okay, that's the bulk of your letter. That's the end of the body. Now the ending. Courtesy phrases and signing off. What we mean by a courtesy phrase here. This is something polite you must include in your letter, because if you don't do that, they are going to withdraw some points. So what I have for you here, how to finish your letter in a nice way. You might say that you want to hear from your friend again. So you might go and say that you are looking forward to hearing from you, from Susan, or you hope to hear from her. Or if you want to be conversational and more informal, you can say something like talk to you or talk to you soon. That's a formula of politeness that has to be in your letter right after you finish with the body. Then, well, that's basically the very end of your letter. You need to sign off. And there is a wide range of closing formulas. Because our letter is informal and also neutral, I've made a selection for you of informal ways to close the letter. You can say all the best, or best wishes, or best regards. You can even finish your letter with love, or lots of love. Or you can simply end with a neutral bye, and don't forget to include your name at the end. Also, please mind that there is a comma after closing formula. So keep in mind the punctuation as well. Okay, so that's the end of our letter. What we have here, I also have, well, some general advice for you. Practice makes perfect. I know everyone says that. This is because it's actually true. The more you practice, the more comfortable you feel with writing, the better you do it on the exam day, actually. So try to spend your time wisely. Try to find some time to practice your writing and letter writing specifically. Another important advice that I want to give you is about vocabulary and about those phrases and expressions. Make them your own. What I mean by that, not always learn them by heart. That's not actually enough. Try to feel those phrases, try to use them as much as possible, so by the time you have to write it for the exam, you feel that you owe those phrases. You made them your own and they are natural. They will feel kind of as if they were with you, as if you have known all those phrases all your life. And then it will be closer to success, I believe. Also, I mentioned the last point already. I suggest that you create some sort of a template to save some time for yourself when writing, and fill this template with those phrases, those expressions that you feel comfortable with. This way, you can guarantee that your writing will be more organized, and also it is much more time efficient. It saves a lot of time if you don't have to think about structure, for example, when you only have to focus on the content. That's actually it for me, from me for letter writing. Thank you very much. I hope you guys have questions and I'm ready to answer those. So, any comments, anything? I'm gonna wait here a bit and see if you have questions. Okay, waiting for you to type it in. Oh, thanks for feedback. Что может не считаться отсылкой к предыдущим контактам? What we actually use as this contact information. This is the opening line. This is where you have to say thank you for your letter, or it's great to hear from you again. That's your reference to previous contacts with your pen friend. Well, I recommend using some of the phrases I suggested in the presentation. Do not improvise there. Do not try to invent something. It is a bit of waste of time. Okay, about drop line, I believe that is the same thing as closing formula or signing off. So that would be some sort of best wishes and looking forward to hearing from you again in reverse order. First looking forward, then best wishes. Well, that's an interesting question. If you have to write, you can write your questions here in Russian. That's fine. With the best wishes instead of best wishes. I wouldn't recommend to write with best wishes, actually, because the formula is best wishes only, 2 words. We don't do with best wishes. Okay, the tense we use for asking questions. The tense for asking questions, I believe you might want to use present tense because you want to know more, if you want to know some details. If we think of the situation with Susan, who adopted a pet, well, maybe you will ask, what's the name? What does it look like? Some general questions, actually. With questions, I think you can write, well, almost the first thing that comes to your mind. So present, maybe future tense. Although if a person suggests that they took part in something, your questions should be in the past as well. So pay attention to actual news. What tense is used in the task will help you deciding on what tense you have to use for the questions. Then, how many lines between every paragraph? Oh, to organize your writing on paper, if you have a neat handwriting, I don't think you need to leave any extra space between paragraphs. But if you know about yourself that, well, you may be a bit messy, or you might want to add something after you finish, do leave probably an extra line, but not too much space. Don't leave too much space. About the address and the date, there are 2 options. You can actually write your full address, including the number of the house you live in, the street, then the city, the country, etc. Or you can go for a shorter option, and you can only state your city and your country. For example, Moscow, Russia. Both options are correct. It's your choice which way you do it. They would not withdraw any points if you prefer a shorter version. It does not affect your points very much, but be careful, do include the address and the date. Don't forget about them. That's the most important part. Well, about the books that were mentioned yesterday, oh, there are lots of places, unfortunately, because of today, they are like, of our situation, they are currently closed, but you can always shop online. You can Google them and there will be lots of options, I believe. What is the right way to write date and address? Well, I talked about the address a bit, so I would recommend probably, I would myself do a shorter version, city and country. About the date, you start with the date, like today is what? The 21st, then you do the month, 21st April 2020. Then when should we write the reaction? Your reaction to the news opens the second body paragraph. So you answer all the questions your friend asked you, and the next paragraph starts with your reaction. And then you ask for more details. About your letter being formal, no. Your letter, your answer is supposed to be informal, but I would say rather neutral. You don't need to use any formal expressions. Actually, that would be a mistake. Well, I talked about the state exam for final year students, so that's ЕГЭ. It's nice to hear from you again. Well, about the tense, if it's like the difference, it was nice, it is nice. I believe, well, I will personally do it in present. That's my humble opinion, because you feel this way in the moment of writing. So it is nice to hear from you again. But again, that's my personal opinion. Internet sites, good source of words and phrases. You have to be careful about using internet sources and different sites, as well as social networks, etc., etc., etc. I think that they are great for phrases that people use in their conversation every day today, but you have to be really careful about using those phrases at the exam. You see, why I say that your letter, it's better if your letter stays kind of neutral, not too informal, because you are taking an exam, and this is sort of serious business. That's why do be careful about sounding too informal. Don't do that. Don't overemphasize that. And please be careful with using internet sites and internet sources. Well, about some space that you have to leave between opening and closing, I wouldn't say so. No, I would leave just the same amount of space as between every paragraph. It makes your letter look neat when there are no too big gaps between parts. I'm not sure that writing again, like I'm happy to hear from you again, is a must, but I can see some reason for writing something. It's great to hear from you again. I'm looking forward to hearing from you soon, and phrases like that. These again and soon and words like this, they suggest that your conversation is ongoing, that you had previous contact with your pen friend, with Susan in our example. So it's a sort of recommendation. You might want to do that to kind of transfer this message that yes, it's a continuation of a conversation, not something new. About including your reaction to the first body paragraph, or to where you thank the person for writing, I do not recommend to do that, because this would mess the structure up and it would break the logic of your letter. Imagine you say thank you, it's great to know that you adopted a pet, and then you start talking about zoos suddenly. That is a little bit illogical, so I would not do that. Thank the person at the beginning, answer their questions, react to the news they shared, and ask for details. Shall we ask questions using future? Well, yeah, again, talking about the tense to build your questions in. Always look at the task. If it refers to the past, you have to use the past. If it is about something in the present, it's the present. If they are telling you that something is going to happen, well, it means that yes, your questions have to be in the future as well. Okay, well, I do believe that you will succeed in all the writing, especially if you're only in the 8th grade and already preparing for everything. Punctuation, again, whether you need a comma after best wishes, yes, you do. When you write this closing phrase like best wishes, all the love, or simply bye, you do need a comma, and then you write your name. Mind you, after your name, you don't really need to put a full stop. Your name is kind of hanging there at the end of it. Your recent letter. Thanks for your recent letter. I would not write it this way. They don't really do it in English. I would just say thank you for your letter, and that's it. What are the differences between formal and informal letters? The differences are in the vocabulary you use, in expressions you use. For example, well, I did not talk about formal expressions on purpose to not kind of not puzzle you, not to make a mess in your head, like even worse. Like I can give you a couple of examples. When you say, when you address your friend, when you greet your friend, an informal way would be simple, hi Susan or dear Susan. A formal way might be something like, to whom it may concern, or dear Miss Williams, for example. That is formal. You don't need that in your letter for the exam. About address and date, I would organize it like, if you are doing full address with the flat and house number, then it would read like your house number, your street, then on the next line your city and country, and on the next line the date. If you're going for a shorter version, one line city, country, next line date. I don't, well, if we're talking about contractions, I don't is 2 words, not 3, because you kind of compressed it into 2 words. What else? Where do we have to put commas? Well, I can't really talk about punctuation in too much detail, because I believe we will have a special class for you guys on the punctuation. So look at the program. Introductory words. In your letter, we do not expect you to use a lot of introductory words and introductory phrases. They might pop up in the first body paragraph if when you talk, for example, stuff you do on a regular basis, and if you generalize, and if you say something like generally or mostly, you would like, that's an introductory word. Also, you do need some introductory phrases when expressing your opinion, like for me, or in my opinion, from my point of view, that's the introductory phrase. Nothing more, not in the letter. They do pop up much more often in the essay, in the second writing task. Yeah, you have to leave some space when you, like, on the left, from the left margin, when you start a new paragraph. Well, the same rules apply to writing in English, the same rules as you write in Russian, guys. So yeah, you do need a bit of like a space at the beginning of every paragraph. Yes, it is necessary to express your reaction to the news. That's one of the requirements. If you fail to do this, they will think that you do not completely answer the task. In your letter. The question about if you have to use in your letter you asked me or in your letter you ask me, you know, I personally would avoid those phrases altogether. I will probably say something like, I would like to answer your questions, or I want to share my thoughts on the questions you asked me. And you can use either past simple, because the questions were already written, or you might want to do it in present perfect, actually, the questions you have asked me. Now tell me about your dog. Instead of reacting, well, you can, but I believe that, well, first, you want to write more words, and you want to do that in an easy way. So I would suggest to include a certain formula, something like, that's great that you now have a dog. So second, phrases like, now tell me about something, well, they do sound a bit like impolite. So you might want to use something more courtesy, more polite, actually. Also, again, remember about the content. Your reaction is part of the requirements. If you don't react, they might think that you haven't completed the task. A comma, well, a comma is a запятая. As for your questions, whether you have to write as for your questions before you actually answer those questions, it's not a must, but if you feel comfortable writing these sort of sentences, if they feel natural for you, that's totally okay. You can do it. Anyway, you have mentioned, yeah, that's also like a way to address the questions. Anyway, you asked about. Usually you don't need a comma before because. To begin with, besides you are interested, and finally you would like to know. Sentences and structures like to begin with, besides, you would like to know, etc., etc. Well, they sound a bit too formal. They are correct, they are okay grammatically and in terms of content. But if we talk about register, they are too formal. You might want to change them for something a little bit more neutral. I wouldn't write something like besides in a personal letter. I personally wouldn't. To begin with, it's totally fine. But besides kind of sounds a little bit off. I'm intrigued about something. Yeah, that's actually interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, you can write something I'm so intrigued about. Okay, it seems I have covered all the questions I have here so far. Do we have any more questions? Okay, you start to thank me, which is great. Thank you all very much. You asked me some questions and I want to answer it. Yes, I think you can. If you want to kind of lead into the first body paragraph, yes, you can do something like, you asked me, so I'm answering. Okay, thank you guys for your attention. Thank you for the questions. I enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you all very much. I believe that's it. So, yeah, good luck to you. I do believe that all of you can succeed actually. You will successfully write and complete writing task 1.